Before we get to the list, let's talk about what's happening right now. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran. The attacks killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and over 1,000 civilians, including 181 children, according to human rights groups. This triggered a regional conflict that has spread to 12 countries. President Donald Trump, who won FIFA's Peace Prize in December, doesn't seem to care. When asked about Iran's participation, Trump said he doesn't care if they play or not. Meanwhile, German politician Jurgen Hardt claimed Germany could also withdraw from the tournament as a last resort to get Trump to see sense over his tariff threats and attempts to acquire Greenland. If Iran or Germany pulls out, they would join a list of countries that have boycotted the World Cup throughout history. Let's count them down.
Hey Goal 90 family, what's good? The World Cup season is here and you already know the vibes on this channel. So for everyone who's been rocking with us, Goal 90 Shop has World Cup jerseys for the whole squad. Men, women and kids. Whatever country you're repping, we've got ya. Home kits, away kits, clean classics and the loud ones. Instant match day energy. And it's love from us. Free shipping worldwide. Grab yours now and let's run this tournament together.
6. England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, 1934. Let's start with the 4 British home nations, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. All 4 countries boycotted the 1934 World Cup held in Italy, but their reason wasn't political. It was simply a matter of priorities. The home nations didn't care about FIFA's tournament. They viewed their own home championship, which had been running since 1883, as far more prestigious. To them, the World Cup was a new competition that wasn't worth their time. It seems ridiculous now, but back then, the British teams genuinely believed their domestic championship was more important than a global tournament. England wouldn't enter the World Cup until 1950, and even then, they were humiliated, losing 1-0 to the United States in one of the biggest upsets in football history. That loss proved their arrogance in the 1930s was misplaced. Scotland eventually entered the World Cup in 1954. Wales made their debut in 1958. Ireland followed later. But in 1934, all 4 home nations made it clear FIFA's tournament didn't matter to them. 5. Turkey, 1950. Turkey qualified for the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, but pulled out before the tournament started. Their reason? Money. Turkey simply couldn't afford to send their team to South America. Travel costs were too high, and the Turkish Football Federation didn't have the budget. Football was still recovering from World War II, and many countries were struggling financially. Turkey's withdrawal showed that even qualifying for the World Cup didn't guarantee participation if the money wasn't there. It was a disappointing decision, but an understandable one. For a country rebuilding after the war, spending money on a football tournament in Brazil wasn't a priority. Turkey would eventually compete in future World Cups, but 1950 wasn't their year. 4. India, 1950. India's story is one of the strangest in World Cup history. They qualified for the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, but withdrew before the tournament started. The official reason given by the All India Football Federation was that they didn't believe the World Cup was overly important. They prioritized the Olympics instead, but that's debated. Reports suggest the real reason was that FIFA refused to let India's players compete barefoot. At the time, Indian footballers often played without shoes, and FIFA's rules required all players to wear boots. India refused to comply, so they pulled out. Whether it was a matter of principle, a lack of interest, or the barefoot issue, India's withdrawal meant they missed their only chance to play in a World Cup for decades. They haven't qualified since 1950, and that withdrawal remains one of the great what-ifs in Indian football history. 3. Argentina, 1938. Argentina boycotted the 1938 World Cup held in France. They were furious that the tournament was being held in Europe again, just 8 years after the successful 1930 tournament in Uruguay. Argentina believes South America deserved to host more often. The 1930 World Cup in Montevideo had been a huge success, and South American football was thriving, but FIFA decided to hold the next 2 tournaments in Europe, 1934 in Italy and 1938 in France. Argentina saw this as a slap in the face. The 1938 World Cup was won by Italy, and Argentina's absence was noted, but FIFA didn't change their hosting policy immediately. It would be 1950 before the World Cup returned to South America, this time in Brazil. Argentina's boycott showed that even in the 1930s, politics and football were deeply connected. Countries weren't just competing for trophies, they were fighting for respect and recognition on the world stage. 2. Uruguay, 1934. Uruguay were the inaugural World Cup champions, winning the tournament in 1930 when they hosted it in Montevideo, but 4 years later they refused to defend their crown. This is the only time in World Cup history that the defending champions didn't participate in the following tournament. Why did Uruguay boycott? Because they were furious that several European countries had refused to travel to South America for the 1930 tournament. Uruguay had invested heavily in hosting the World Cup. They built a brand new stadium, the Estadio Centenario, and welcomed the world to Montevideo. But only 4 European teams made the trip: France, Belgium, Yugoslavia, and Romania. The rest stayed home, claiming the journey was too long, too expensive, and not worth the effort. Major footballing nations like England, Scotland, Italy, Spain, and Germany didn't bother showing up. Uruguay took that as a massive insult. So when Italy hosted the 1934 World Cup, Uruguay decided to boycott in protest. Instead of trying to retain their title, Uruguay sat at home and watched Italy win. It was a bold statement, and it showed that even in the early days of the World Cup, politics and pride mattered just as much as football. And now, the #1 most significant World Cup boycott, the USSR in 1974. This was entirely political, and it remains one of the most controversial moments in World Cup history. The USSR had to play Chile in a 2-legged World Cup qualifier to seal their place in the 1974 tournament in West Germany. The first leg in Moscow ended 0-0, a tense, cagey match with everything to play for in the second leg. But the USSR refused to play the second leg in Santiago, Chile. Why? Because just weeks earlier, in September 1973, a CIA-backed military coup had overthrown Chile's democratically elected socialist government led by President Salvador Allende. The coup was brutal. The second leg was scheduled to be played at the Estadio Nacional in Santiago, but that stadium had been turned into a detention center just a week before. Upon hearing this, USSR refused to play in that stadium. On November 21st, 1973, Chile turned up at the Estadio Nacional. The USSR didn't. With no opposition on the pitch, Chile kicked off, passed the ball around, and one player dribbled forward and kicked the ball into an empty net. The referee blew the whistle. Chile had won the match and qualified for the 1974 World Cup. The USSR were disqualified and Chile went to the World Cup. But the USSR's boycott was a powerful statement. It showed that some things matter more than football. Even if it cost them a place at the World Cup, the USSR refused to compromise their principles. So, will Iran and Germany join this list? Iran's participation looks increasingly unlikely. If Iran pulls out, the United Arab Emirates is reportedly on standby to replace them. But whether Iran withdraws or not, this crisis has already cast a massive shadow over the 2026 World Cup. As for Germany, it's less certain. But if Trump continues with his tariff threats and Greenland acquisition plans, Germany pulling out would be a huge embarrassment for FIFA and the United States. Germany is one of the most successful teams in World Cup history. Losing them would damage the tournament's credibility. We'll find out soon. The 2026 World Cup is supposed to be a celebration of football, but it's turning into a political minefield. So there you have it. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.